Okay, welcome back. Again, I'm going to welcome you to the Hudson Valley Credit Union Small Business Survival Series. My name is David Dirks. I'm Vice President of Marketing for Hudson Valley Credit Union, and happy to have you here if you're a business owner who's looking to get some information on managing a remote workforce. We have a very exciting panel with us today to help you kind of navigate the very complex environment that exists today as various locations and states do their own thing. I'm going to introduce, before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I'm going to just go over a couple of housekeeping rules. First of all, we're running a live Q&A. So you'll see that there's in the taskbar there, the Q&A has been enabled. That will allow you to type in a question. So anytime you think of a question, don't be afraid to type it in, and then we'll make sure we'll do our best at the end of the presentation here, the panel, we'll go ahead and open it up to those answering those questions. So we'll try to answer as many as we can in the time that we have. So we expect about 30 to 45 minutes of panelist questions. We have some questions already prepared. And then at some point in time, we will go ahead and open it up for a Q&A. So we should be finished somewhere around 3 p.m. So that's all I have for housekeeping. Now, let me introduce, without further ado, our presenters. First of all, we have Dr. Jack Roche, who is currently Associate Professor at Fisher College in Boston, right in center Boston. And Dr. Roche has held several senior executive positions in a broad range of industries, including commodities, publishing, law, manufacturing, and academia. And he currently runs and oversees the Human Resources Management program at Fisher College and has been there for some time. Karen Gates is our other panelist. Karen has been, she is a human resources leader here at Hudson Valley Credit Union. She's been with us for over 5 years. She's held many positions in her HR career and currently serves as our business partner here, human resources business partner. Karen holds a master's degree in business administration from Mount St. Mary's College. And then we have Mr. Nicholas Morrow. Nick is the manager of recruitment and workforce development over at the Office of Human Resources at Marist College, right up the road from us here. And he manages the employee life cycle and workforce development functions for about overseeing for about 1,300 employees at Marist. It was more than I thought. That's a lot of employees, big. His experience and expertise includes more than 14 years in all aspects of human resources, work, organizational development, and business operations. So I want to welcome each of you taking time out of your busy day to join us here at Hudson Valley for this seminar. Thank you all. So let me just set the table here, and then we're going to open it up to some questions for our panelists. And obviously the reason we're hosting this is that businesses of all sizes now, even before COVID, we're already moving in a remote workforce pattern. It's not nothing that all COVID did was accelerate it for all of us because it forced us, a lot of us, to move people outside the offices because we had to. But that also changed the dynamic of the environment that all of us are managing. And so small businesses now have all kinds of opportunities in front of them to consider if they have a workforce that can in fact work remotely. So my first question for the panelists, and we'll start with Dr. Roche first, is considering that small businesses have an opportunity to consider managing and building a remote workforce, what are some of the advantages that you see for businesses in building a remote workforce? Your mute's on, Dr. Roche.
Okay, from a human resource point of view, it allows us really to interview for people from all over the place, really, from any part of the country. As a matter of fact, I just did an interview yesterday remotely, and it worked out exceptionally well, even though technology didn't agree with me a little. I got cut off a few times, but it did work. But as far as working remotely, COVID really taught us I'm talking about the faculty and the staff, how to deal with online education and online meetings. We held no meetings whatsoever on campus. Everything was done remotely. And we actually learned while we were doing. And it actually proved to be quite good because we got more of an audience when we did it remotely
Right.
than if we were to hold a meeting and bring in everybody from, all over Massachusetts or New Hampshire and have them sit there.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually was a benefit. I hate to say that, but there's a few things that happened with COVID that actually made things a little bit better.
Yeah. So for small businesses, you feel that gives them more flexibility. Would that be your basic answer to that?
It gives them more flexibility, but there's always in the minds of human resource people, are my employees working? They're sitting at home. Are they? And unless you're checking the computer all the time, or unless the employee has a certain amount of work that they do, and once they complete it, fine, that's it. So there's that problem. But as far as academia is concerned, it worked out exceptionally well. However, just like employees, students will turn on the computer and then go talk to their girlfriend or something like that. And we never know that until we start asking questions.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you, sir. I'm going to pass the question on to Nick Morrow. Nick, same question for you. What do you see as some advantages for small business owners to consider a remote workforce?
In the Hudson Valley, specifically, not maybe so much at Marist, but in some of the work I do on the side, working with some businesses and nonprofits, the remote work environment that we're in has allowed, it's normalized it, right? So, job seekers are looking for remote opportunities. It's not this strange experience like it might have been maybe 20 years ago where, am I really going to feel like part of the team, and will I produce it? They're going to keep me on. So it's become part of the working world. I think for small businesses specifically, they're able to go fill those tough to find, roles and opportunities. So maybe you're having a hard time finding a database administrator or a marketing specialist. Maybe there's somebody in Long Island or New Jersey or Connecticut who's, willing to join your team, but maybe they only come up, maybe one day a week. So from a talent perspective, a talent acquisition and recruitment perspective, like almost overnight, it's allowed small businesses to have this whole new world of talent, specifically. A lot of small businesses are lean and you wear multiple hats and stuff. So I think that the flexibility that remote, offers, you can start a little earlier, take a longer lunch, work a little bit later. I think the childcare, right? They're across the living room rather than having, to find them, spot in daycare. There's a lot of flexibility advantages, I think, for small businesses. And I would assume that many of them in this region are going to continue to kind of leverage that as not just a competitive advantage in the labor market, but just, operationally, it makes a lot of efficiencies that they just didn't have, a year and a half ago. So I expect it to stick around. And I hope, a lot of small businesses, continue to embrace it. I think it's something that should be here to stay.
Yeah, that's good. Well, that's great. You and Dr. Roche are basically saying, hey, opens up a whole new opportunity in terms of talent, which you couldn't do geographically before. Very good. Then I'm going to turn it over to Karen Gates. Karen?
Yes. Well, I think first and foremost, for each small business, they need to take into consideration whether or not remote work will work for, in their industry and their culture. And so first determining that, I think there are many advantages related to remote workforce, particularly just as Nick mentioned, it is a competitive advantage to cast a wider net. In particular, roles even prior to COVID were remote based, and that was one of the recruiting considerations, in that your talent pool could be across the country or, situated in specific areas. So I would say that certainly is a competitive advantage or one of the benefits of remote work, along with the flexibility and, your work-life balance. There are some challenges with that, but that certainly is another aspect, that would be in the positive.
Yes, well, that's good. And that's a good segue when you mentioned the challenges, Karen. So let's start with that. Let's pick up now. We know we've identified just a few advantages for small business owners to consider, but there are a lot of challenges out there. Why don't we start with that? And then I'm going to turn that over to, actually, Karen, why don't we start with you this time with that one? What do you see as some of the challenges, and how can they be addressed?
Well, certainly communication. So I would say that you would want to make sure that you have regularly scheduled touch base for your staff if you are going to employ a remote workforce, because you want to make sure those employees have a sense of belonging, and that can be strained if they're not seeing their coworkers on a daily or weekly basis, as well as just to make sure that they have the technology in place to support. And so are there, considerations from an IT standpoint, a security standpoint, that you need to make sure that you're protecting your customers' information or your employees and your employees' work. So those, I would say, are two of the things that a small business would want to take into consideration if they're going to, employ a remote workforce.
Good, very good. Thank you. And then Nick, I'll shoot over to you. Same question.
Yeah, I think kind of building on that, I mean, communication, right? It's a huge component of management and leadership. I think, with communication, like just transparency and what's going on, how are we doing, right? When this all initially hit, a lot of businesses were hit pretty hard, and a lot of folks out there, hopefully not in everybody's businesses here or on this Zoom today, but a lot of folks went remote, overnight, and they didn't know how are things going, right? The communication kind of fell apart, and people weren't given a chance, I think, to be heard, right? Like maybe you got that one staff meeting once a week. So, with communication, I think it's important not just, to schedule those regular check-ins, but also to get feedback the other way, right? What's working? What's not working? What do we want to keep from this crazy experience from the last year? So not just kind of managing downhill, but giving everybody in the team, a chance to speak up and be heard, because you need everybody, I think, to get through a time like this. So with communication, having every member of the team have an outlet or an opportunity to be heard about what's working, or you never know where you're going to get that next great idea, right? Maybe somebody's got something that could really make a difference right now, and they're not getting that usual interaction. So making sure, I think, you get to everybody and giving them a chance to contribute.
Okay, good points. And to you, Dr. Roche?
Well, we just had graduation last week, and it was a great event because of the fact that I was able to actually see the faculty that I had been so close with and never saw during the COVID experience. And one of the things about working when you get a job and you work, part of that is the social ability that you have with the other people that you work with. And working remotely kind of puts a damper on it. So it behooves the organization to communicate, as Karen said and Nick said, to communicate more, to bring everybody together so that they see each other, they hear each other. That's a big thing, and it's something that we all missed. And it was like old homework at graduation. I mean, we didn't almost care about the students. We were just more or less, oh, there you are. Oh, it's good to see you again. That type of thing. But that's a challenge that we have with the remote learning and remote working, and that's a problem.
Well, that's a good point. I'm going to segue there because I think you're all bringing up something very important, and that is, what do you lose by working remotely? And so you mentioned communications at value, right? That's at risk. You've got what do you each of you think about and I hear this from business owners saying, well, I like the fact that we can trade ideas. I think we get more ideation. There's more problem solving going on, might be better. I don't know if that's true or not if by working directly, or do you lose some of it when you work remotely? And then I don't know. Nick, why don't we start with you on that one?
I think a little bit of both. I think some people naturally thrive remotely, right? Like remote work has been around. I have an uncle who's done it, for a couple decades, but it's new, I think, to a lot of us. So understanding, to Dr. Roche's point, that it's not necessarily like natural, right? We all crave belonging to something bigger than us, human interaction. So most of us can get through it, but it's not necessarily ideal, I think, for everybody. So it's important, I think, to remember that. With that, yeah, sure, there's been opportunities, for innovation and such along the way. But remembering that this is not ideal for everybody. And I think that's really critically important to check in with people, to get into what's working and not working, because there's going to be some folks in your organization who are going to be struggling with this. So it's important to manage performance a little bit more closely, right? I saw some statistic along the way on like some LinkedIn article that said that casual conversation with your manager, is down like 75%. So what are you doing to replace that, right? Like, you're not filling the whole gap, but every aspect of what we do gets strained when we're not physically in the same place, right? So, depending on what industry you're in or what it is that you do, regardless of where you came from, some of those basic elements I think to apply to every job, right? Having authentic connections with folks, and also too, it doesn't have to be a work meeting, where you reach out to somebody for 5 minutes. I have somebody at Maris that I just touched base with 8:45 in the morning for like 5 minutes every once in a while, where we know we're both drinking coffee, we're both reading email, and it helps, right? It's like a little bit of like a therapy session. So don't think of it just in the context of it has to be a work, production, meeting. Have some human interaction, I think, mixed in too.
Okay, good. Thank you. Dr. Roche or Karen, whoever wants to take it from there. Dr.
All
Roche?
right. One of the courses that I teach students how to be interviewed. And I was, in my advisory committee, which Dave, you were a part of, I basically asked the committee, where is the future going as far as interviewing is concerned? And you all basically stated remotely. And so I had to now teach the students how to be interviewed remotely. And as Nick said, it's not for everyone. And there are some students who just could not speak to a screen. And they thrived on that human interaction. And even though there is a screen and there's a picture of a person moving around on the screen, it wasn't the same thing. So based on what Nick said, yeah, there are people out there who just could not do that. And unfortunately, it's probably us old farts who really have been so used to the facial interaction every day type of thing. We have a difficult time doing this thing remote. So yeah, it's not for all of us.
Good points. Good points. And Karen?
And I agree. I agree with both Nick and Dr. Roche. And in addition, it's about creating a work-life balance. If I can be on my laptop in my sunroom, all day long, and then jump back on, I think one of the things that we have to have a heightened awareness around is your employee burnout. And again, that you can identify that through communication and through productivity measures, but making sure that we're setting the example by saying, yes, we don't just use the words of work-life balance. We want to make sure that you're able to, especially since the boundaries are now crossed, go ahead and provide employees that support and make sure it's a culture that's it's okay, to make sure you're turning your laptop, your cell phone off, and you're going to take a break and take a walk outside. all things to think about.
Yeah, all good. Good points so far. Now, one thing, and it was mentioned earlier, I don't know if it might have been Dr. Roche, you might have mentioned something about trust. So I hear a lot of I hear this from friends of my own businesses. I don't, how do I know they're actually getting the job done? How do I know they're not running to the refrigerator every 5 minutes? It's that old, and that's a question, by the way, pre-COVID, everybody was like, I don't know, how do I monitor that? So let's talk about trust and how that plays a role and how do you address it in a remote workforce situation? And I'm going to start with Karen, if you don't mind, with you first.
Sure. So I would say the first is clear expectations. So what are the deliverables that you need that employee to work through and by what time. And then you don't need to micromanage them if they're able to meet those expectations. So clear feedback, clear expectations, and then as long as you're communicating and you're setting what the expectations are, the trust will come from that. And there's always, and small businesses may have some budgetary restraints, but there are many technologies out there that will allow you to monitor exactly what your employee is doing if necessary, through a VPN network, different types of software to be able to see. And so, with that, you want to have transparency and let them know that you're planning to employ some of those technologies, but there's certainly that avenue as well.
Okay, very good. Dr. Roche?
The federal government is lagging behind in this because of the Fair Labor Standards Act and classifying people as hourly and salary or exempt and non-exempt. And the problem is, if you're paying someone hourly, how do you know that you're getting the full hour's worth? Whereas if you were paying someone a salary, therefore exempt, you pay them basically on the work that they do or the resulting of the work. So yeah, it's going to be a little bit different in the future when the government starts realizing, I don't know if we should be paying people per hour, but we violate the law if we don't, especially for those people who are not truly exempt. So there's a problem in compensation. There's a problem in, I believe, I agree with you as far as trust is concerned. If I'm paying you for the full hour, how do I know that I'm getting my hour's worth of work out of you? And that's a big problem. And the government, the federal government anyway, they haven't said anything about this.
Interesting. Okay. So hopefully more to come on that. And I guess that would be true both ways. It's either you're not getting enough or you have a non-exempt person working remotely that might be working too many hours and is not getting paid properly for overtime and things like that. So I guess that's a tricky situation to manage there. Nick, why don't we move it over to you now?
Trust in performance and such in a remote environment, if it's not already difficult, right? And when you're face to face, performance management and difficult conversations and making sure people are producing is tough enough when you're in the same physical space, right? So when you're remote, I think you got to remember that it also goes both ways. Also, you're maybe a first-time manager, business owner in a remote environment, right? So in the same way that you're maybe looking a little bit closer at that employee or your team of what are they doing and how are they doing it, and say you're asking them for regular check-ins or producing work, twice a week, once a week, whatever system you come up with. I think it's also important to remember, as far as building trust and good performance remotely, they're also looking at you that way, right? They've got lots of remote options now across the country. They're looking at your leadership a little bit closer, and you should also be a little open of, hey, is this working? How am I doing? Is there anything we can do a little bit better here to help you produce a little bit more, or a little bit better, or what can I do to manage you and the team, a little bit better too? That's something I've seen a lot of. It's a lot of downhill management of this is what I expect and this is when you're checking in. Be sure to have a little bit of the other side of it too, of what's working, what's not working, how am I doing, what can we do better as a team or as an organization? And I think when people think, come to believe that they're part of the team and they're part of the success of the organization during this difficult time, they're more inclined to stay, they're more inclined to produce, at a higher rate. They're going to have trust in your leadership. So to me, there's kind of two distinct sides to it, for it to work, really, really well. And then it's still a challenge, so.
Still a challenge. Yeah, it was always a challenge when they were in the office. Now what are we going to do? And now that's all good. Now that kind of brings me, it's a good segue to my next topic, and that is the hybrid models, which you hear a lot about now. A lot of companies are like, well, we're going to go to a hybrid model where maybe you're in the office 2 days a week and you're working remotely 3 days a week or whatever, some combination thereof. Do you have an opinion on that? Do you think that's kind of the way the model might go, or is it just another option for employers to consider? And why don't we start actually with Dr. Roche on that one?
I think it works. We have 3 types of classes. We have on-site, online, and the hybrid. where they meet one day a week on site and the rest of the time they're online. And the students enjoy it and the faculty enjoys it. I don't have to travel into Boston every day, and I live in New Hampshire, so that is quite a hike. So yeah, that works. And also it eliminates that sociability problem where you never get to see the people that you work with. And I think the hybrid is a good idea. I totally enforce it. It's kind of like we're in between the two extremes, the online and on site. And it kind of brings together both the benefits of both, and it solves the problems of both. So I'm in favor of it.
Okay. Nick, why don't we bounce it over to you?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Dr. Roche. I think that's where a lot of this is probably heading, right? We're still going to need that human, face-to-face kind of interaction, the natural conversations, the productivity that comes in. It helps you, I think, address some of the talent, issues. It gives flexibility for folks who maybe they couldn't accept a full-time job. We've seen a lot of that at Marist where, we have a lot of part-time folks who help support, our entire organization. So maybe you can attract and retain somebody who otherwise might not consider working for you because you now have, some flexibility. Maybe childcare was their challenge, for example. So I absolutely think it's here to stay. If it can, you can keep smaller office space or build a larger team. You don't have some of that overhead. You've got the folks that naturally prefer to be in person, able to do that, and you can have a really good mix. It adds in another way, another element of like a more diversity, right? More perspectives, more, different types of work. There's not too many drawbacks. I think the scheduling and how you do it, being fair about it and giving people a chance, to be in or out, you don't have one person, they're stuck with Mondays, for the rest of their lives, and you're giving everybody, other members of the team a better deal. So it's got a lot of advantages, I think, but I think it's definitely where this is going to be, a year from now.
Okay.
Hybrid. Yep.
Good. Thank you. Ms. Karen?
So I would say again, each organization has to really look at their culture and say, is this something that's going to work for us, internally? I think I read it was a poll from USA Today that said as of April, 23% of the workforce was in a hybrid model. And so with that, I would say, yeah, I think it's certainly a item that needs to be reviewed and looked at as whether it would work for a small business. But it does seem like it's not going away. So I would agree with my colleagues for all those benefits as well.
That's good. And so that kind of raises an issue to me, though, when I'm thinking about you guys talking about it, and I wouldn't disagree. I think it's a great balance. But you're going to have workforces now that are going to be a little bit different. So, for example, I heard Jamie Dimon the other day talking about his workforce. He said some people aren't going to be able, their jobs require them to be there. And then there are going to be some part of our workforce that they can have that flexibility. How do you see that? Do you see some little bit of a, diffusion or some stress going on between people who are going to have the flexibility to work hybrid or completely remote versus people, because of the nature of their job, can't do it? Do you see that as a future struggle here as organizations, especially larger ones, start to deal with it? And I'll start with Karen, if we can actually start with you on that one.
So yes, I do think that there's going to be pushback from employees to say, why am I not provided with the opportunity to work remotely? However, each industry, has their different sets of needs. And so that's where you have a fully transparent conversation with that employee based on an updated job description to say, these essential functions cannot be done remotely, and hence I can't provide you with that option. However, if you are interested in one of these other particular roles, then that might be something to consider. So I think, unfortunately, even we saw that in our organization, that there were just some roles that did need to come in, and we tried to work through those. When we were fully shut down, we worked with staff and provided them alternate roles for a period of time. But again, there are just some that do need to be in-house. So that's just, that's where, very transparent conversation has to come in.
Okay,
So they understand the reasons why.
very good. Thank you, Karen. Nick, your comments?
Yeah, I think that's in some ways the reality and the nature of some, businesses to some extent, right? So, considering that, I think there's still some things you can do in a little bit of this new world. Like, think about, like pre-COVID, pre the whole world's remote, some organizations would do, flexible schedules. Like maybe you got some people coming in, they'll let the early risers come in a little bit earlier and let some people start a little bit later. There's things you can still do to kind of shift the culture in your workplace or accommodate folks or lengthen lunch or, there are always things you can do to enhance and support the workplace. So maybe you need to consider, those kinds of maneuvers. If you have an accounting team that just has to be in the office because it's just the nature of the way your business operates, maybe you can offer them, a different schedule or an alternate schedule or so there's things you can do, I think, to be a little more equitable in kind of, rolling this out. But your operations and your business kind of ultimately does have to come first too. And it's important to remember that this, shouldn't be a free for all either, but people appreciate those little things. So if you can do something small to make it a little bit better, why not, right? It makes for a more productive, employee.
Good. Excellent. Good points. And Dr. Roche?
Well, I think Karen hit the nail on the head when she said job descriptions. So now it's just another line that we put on the job description underneath the knowledge, skills, and abilities. And must work on site, period. Obviously, manufacturing jobs, you can't do that remotely. Office jobs, there's a possibility. And hybrid, there's a possibility. So, it all really stems from the job description. Unfortunately, those people who are already working, there's your problem, being able to talk to the individuals about working remotely or not working remotely. And really, it depends upon the job. It's not the person, it depends upon the job. Manufacturing, no, sorry, you can't do it. Office, possibility.
Very good. Thank you. So let me segue now to a topic that pre-COVID, there were already talent pools being created electronically where a small business owner could go in and tap into talent on a contractor basis. So do you see, and there are, you can hire a marketer, you can hire a creative designer on an ad hoc basis. Do you see that becoming more of an option for a small business as they look for ways to kind of, you already mentioned that talent, now you can hire talent maybe from places you couldn't get before because you're willing to do more work remotely. How do you see that on the side of people the talent pools that are out there on a contractor basis? And we'll start with maybe Dr. Roche.
Well, Dave, as you know, a long time ago, I started my own outsourcing business where I outsourced myself to small businesses to be their human resource department. And when COVID struck, I didn't miss a beat because instead of going to their site maybe once a week, I was able to do everything remotely. So what I see is the fact that a lot of companies will start to outsource more of their functions than actually hire people. And of course, there's a savings there too also. So I see that in the future also, where a lot of companies are going to start to outsource their functions and not have to worry about having a desk and office space and paying the square footage for that office space for the individuals who work there.
Yeah. Yep. Big savings there potentially. Karen?
No, I agree 100%. I think that as part of any workforce plan, you need to identify what are the skills that you need, and then where is that talent? Is that talent best suited, maybe being provided by a third party because they have the ability to provide the expertise, especially in a small business where you're stretched and you're wearing many hats. It may make sense to say, okay, I understand that this is a payroll processing company or an accounting firm that will have the specialty knowledge to, make sure I don't get into trouble. Those types of things. So I foresee that absolutely being another resource that's leveraged in the future. I totally agree 100%.
Okay. And as I know, as workforces kind of move through this whole process, there's always the diversity question. So does the ability now to access a wider talent pool help companies, small business owners and otherwise, does it accelerate their ability to provide a more diverse workforce? And I'm going to turn that over to you, Nick, first.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at Marist, we when Marist was much smaller, 20, 30 years ago, we hired everybody from the Hudson Valley. We staffed Marist College from the surrounding counties. As the college grew, we needed more expertise, and we were just attracting, talent from across, the country, and we got a lot of international applications as well. Yeah, I mean, diversity and talent and workforce development has a lot of different aspects to it, but absolutely, if you can leverage a more diverse, talent pool to make a selection and consider candidates, that's only going to, advance your workforce. That's the goal of any good recruiter, I think, is you don't want 5 candidates to look exactly the same. You want 5 candidates who have the knowledge, the skills, the abilities, and the experience, but maybe come from different industries or have, so that's what I think, produces high performing teams. So, this is a really unique environment. And I think a lot of businesses that weren't able to do this before are now, in the game, to find more diverse talent. So.
Okay, very good. Dr. Roche, diversity.
20% of our student body are international students, and they are bright. They have talents that some of the people who were born in the United States do not have. And unfortunately, with our rules and regulations, especially coming out of the previous White House, they have to go back to their home country. Unless they're sponsored by somebody here in the United States, we lose them. And boy, this is a great opportunity for people in the United States to diversify, to bring on these people from foreign countries, foreign cultures. And I mean, we used to be, back in the 20s, I guess, we used to be a mix, a melting pot of all of these cultures. And we seem to have lost that. And my biggest challenge, I guess, is to be able to convince the people in Washington to open up the gates and allow the students who went to school here to stay here and use the education that we taught them for the benefit of people of the country and of the economy here in the United States. So yeah, I have that's a sore point with me. So I'll end it right there.
Well, and a lot of companies have been, not so much smaller companies, but that happens now too with smaller companies. They have employees or people that they work with overseas in, different talent pools and whatnot. I don't know if, I guess if you bring somebody if you have a remote workforce and they happen to be in India or wherever they happen to be, Germany, is there any issues there in terms of can they not work? I'm saying they're in the country that they're in country, not here. Does remote workforce in the situation we're in now, does that make it easier for us to utilize that talent? I don't know.
Who are you asking?
I'm asking anybody because
I have one student that I have in mind. She was our salutatorian last year, and she's French. And she got an internship of a French company in Florida, but she still has to be sponsored by them, even though it's a French company and she's from France. She still has to be sponsored by them to work in the United States. Now, working remotely, that's an argument, or that I don't think the government has even thought about yet. As to, gee, I have an employee who is in Germany, and I'm a German company. Do I have to sponsor them to come to the United States, or can we just leave it remote and there we go?
Yeah.
So the answer to your question, Dave, there is no answer to your question.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Karen, you want to say something?
Well, from a diversity standpoint, so for us at the credit union, one of our core values is we work as a team strengthened by our diversity to exceed expectations for our employees and our members. And so it's a top of mind for us, in terms of making sure that you are really bringing in a workforce that is inclusive, and that there's equity, and that people have a feeling of safety, so psychological safety when they come in to the organization. And in terms of outsourcing roles beyond our borders, there are certainly, even within the United States, outside of where we are located in New York, there are regulatory concerns, there are payroll related items or taxes. There's all different types of things that you need to take into consideration when you're using those services. And so for a small business, should you want to explore that, I would say, partner with a really good employment attorney to identify where those barriers are, or where those, what those considerations are before you embark upon using any other services, for sure. If that makes sense.
Oh, I was muted, sorry. Always good to get counsel and check things out before you commit to anything. So that's always a good rule. Thank you, Karen. I'm going to switch gears here, and then we're going to do one more round of questions here for each panelist. And then we're going to go into some of the questions that have come up from some of our folks who are listening with us today. My last question here, and I'd like to ask this again, each panelist to provide an answer to this question. So in order to create an effective remote workforce and culture, so if we're going to go that route, and we've made the commitment to do it, whether it's hybrid or it's a little bit of both, what do you believe are the one or two things that you want to make sure that you do to make sure that you have a good, effective culture for a remote workforce? We're going to start with Nick first.
It's a great question. I think when remote hit hard a year ago, it was like survival. Right now, if we're going to continue doing it and doing it well, now we're talking about culture and communication and such, and it's great. I'd say three quick things to building a strong culture remotely. People got to have some kind of mission. They have to know the scope of their job, what they're required, how does being remote impact them, what the expectations are. The mission of your role and where and how it contributes to the organization can get a little blurry when you're remote. So, and that's why people are attracted to industries and work and career is the mission of the organization. So, mission, you got to be transparent in this environment. People have to know how they're doing, how the organization's doing. You're not getting everybody around the table for lunch every now and then, or having big team meetings. Communication naturally, this has been a theme today, is naturally, not there. You've got to be much more intentional about it. So you got to be intentional, and you've got to give everybody a chance to speak up and be heard. You got to give everybody a voice. I think if you're doing those three things in some kind of hybrid or remote environment, I think you're going to be okay. We've all probably seen examples of one or two of those that have been missing. And that's where I think businesses really can kind of fall apart. So giving people a purpose, being transparent, and giving everybody a chance to be heard. And I think you'll have at least the start, I think, of a good
Okay.
culture.
Very good. Thank you, Nick. Karen, I'm going to point over to you. Same question.
Yeah, totally piggyback off what Nick had said is, you think about people as your most valuable resource. So how are you treating them? How are you communicating with them? Making sure that there is, horizontal, vertical communication. And so just checking in and often, and ensuring that you're removing any barriers or obstacles for them to be successful so that they feel supported. So I would say those are the key things to creating a successful working remote type of culture.
Very good. Thank you, Karen. Dr. Roche, finishing that one up.
Probably out of all the human resource functions, the interview process, which I'm assuming is part of Nick's job and Karen's job, is probably the most important. But you choose the wrong people and forget about everything else. It just doesn't work. So if you're going to do all your interviewing remotely, you will actually see the individual, how they handle a remote situation. And therefore, you're building the culture of a remote body of workers. And yeah, I guess that interviewing process, doing it remotely, is really going to tell you a lot about the individual and how they handle themselves talking to a screen, or being able to communicate with everybody else through this new medium that we have now that's been forced upon us.
Okay.
So kudos to Nick and Karen.
There you go. Excellent. So I appreciate the time we've had. Actually, it went really fast, right? 45 minutes. Now we're going to spend a few minutes. I have some questions here from some of our attendees. And I'm going to start with, in no certain order here. The first one, and the way we'll do this is anybody of the panel that wants to start is able to kick off. So if you feel you have a strong answer for this, please feel to do so. I've got a few questions here. First one is, what do you think will be employers' biggest challenges when offices begin to reopen in larger numbers? Anyone? What do you think will be employers' biggest challenges when offices begin to reopen in large numbers?
Having the employees come in late because there's going to be more traffic. One of the great things about traveling to Boston every day since COVID, nobody's on the road. So I was able to get there in less than an hour. But once everybody starts going back to work, and then there's the problem of, oh, I was late. I the traffic was too much. So that's just one of that's the first thing that popped in my mind when you asked the question.
Okay. Any other panelists?
I would say I also think employees who have been remote for this past year and now are going to be placed back in close proximity to one another where they had previously had worries regarding that. It's about really allowing employees to adjust to that, new normal. And so I think just having an awareness, making sure that there's resources available to them, whether it be EAP or whatnot, for them to kind of talk through some of those things. That's certainly going to be an adjustment. It's going to take time. And I think that there needs to be an awareness of that and a tolerance.
Okay, good points. Very good points. Nick, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think they both nailed it. I don't have anything to add to it.
All right, we'll find a question for you here. Don't worry, you're going to be next here. All right, so let's talk about tips. Here's the next question. Tips on retaining employees if you are looking to bring staff back 100% with so many new remote options out there now. So we hear this a lot now from other employers where they're competing now for people in California that are willing to hire somebody in New York and have them work 100% remotely, and or people that are looking for jobs and only want remote. How do you retain and employees to make sure that there's a new competitive element here? I'll start with Nick. Actually, why don't we start with you?
That's a really good question. It's something I've heard at Marist internally. It's something I've heard with some different businesses I work with outside of Marist. I'm going to quote the guy who ran the people operations at Google for like 12 years. And I heard him talk once and he was great. He said, your employees want to be learning or they want to be earning. Like, you got to first be kind of candid with yourself about why people work, right? So those are the two key things of why folks, have careers. So I think you need to reflect as a business, reflect as an organization, as a leader about the culture. A lot of the themes we've talked about today, the culture, and what is the experience that people have working for you? Are they learning? Are they engaged, right? So coming back, and I had this conversation Wednesday night with a executive director of a nonprofit. He was already charged up to go and ready to go forward. And he wasn't going to stop and pause and reflect back on what worked, what didn't work, what could he do better. I think before we leap forward, we've got to look a little bit at where were we exposed, right? As a leader, What did I do? What did I do wrong? So, you got to like kind of take stock of where you went. And as far as, ensuring your treat people better, whatever that means, offer more flexibility, listen to folks, and give them a chance to grow in their jobs, and compensate them as well as you can. And they're more likely to stay. But those two things have always stuck with me: learning or earning. Folks want one or ideally both, but they want one or the other. So,
Yep, depending on the time. That's a great way to put it, Nick. Thank you for that. And Karen, your comments on that, on being able to retain employees in a market where now they have a lot more remote opportunities.
No, I think I agree with Nick 100%, but I also think, culture as a whole, are you a welcoming and inclusive culture? Is your organization, you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So you have your psychological safety, and then you want to be at that point where you are helping those employees to really self-actualize where they want to be, getting where they want to go. So those are going to be the differentiators, those types of moments that are going to keep your employees with you if you decide not to embrace a remote workforce.
Yep, good points. Thank you. Dr. Roche?
We have a bank that's in our neighborhood that literally closed down because they couldn't find employees to work. And and it's a big bank. I won't mention the name, but it's one of our larger banks, and this branch office closed down. So I guess I'll go back to my international problem of people who are, I think we're having a very difficult time finding people to work for us. And unfortunately, the government, fortunately or unfortunately, passing, it's actually better for them to stay home and collect money than to go out and work. So once we get past that, I think we have to go back to our normal way of cutting down turnover rates and keeping people on board. But we've got a few hurdles to go through, and finding the right people is going to be the toughest challenge right now. Again, my hat's off to Nick and Karen on that end. And once we get them here, and all this money that's being handed out stops, we'll be able to keep them.
Take myself off mute. Okay, thank you, Dr. Roche. Appreciate that. Good answers to a very tough question in terms of remotely competitive workforces. We'll do one last question here. Let me see, I'll just pick this one here. So, and we touched on this a little bit, but communication seems to be a common theme here. How do we maintain a communications thread for either a hybrid or a completely remote workforce? And the question is, no matter what employers decide about their remote work strategies, what are the best practices for communicating with employees? And what should employers be saying to employees? So let's talk about that again. Maybe we'll nail that one home as we kind of finish up here. Why don't we start with Dr. Roche?
I have 4 kids, and none of them live in the same area. One's in Wyoming, one's in DC, one's on Long Island, the other one's in Connecticut. How do we stay in touch? Exactly the way we're doing it right now. And so why not utilize this method to keep in touch with all your employees? And I think Nick brought it up that every morning he has a cup of coffee. I remember that, Nick. He has a cup of coffee with someone online, and we should set that up. There's no reason in the world with Zoom and Teams, and even our own at the college, we have our own learning system, we call it Blackboard, where we can communicate with anybody at any time. And so now, instead of getting up from your desk and walking down the hall and visiting someone, you just click on the TV, click on the monitor, and bingo, you're talking to them.
Good, thank you, sir. And Karen?
So I would say that there should be multiple ways that you communicate with your employees. So, for us at Hudson Valley, we have pretty formulated process for, we call them one-on-ones. So when you're talking about your employee in terms of where they are in terms of meeting their goals and where they like to go with their careers, and so that, that occurs, and we monitor and we audit for that. But I think that there also needs to be those informal conversations and those times where you have your office hours, and if an employee needs to pop in and touch base with you, then that needs to also happen, so that you're providing them the support and the communication that they need. So I would say, as a small business, you may want to also consider, leveraging technology in terms of, maybe you have an info net for staff so they can all see messaging at the same time. There are different types of technologies that are available for that as well.
Yeah, they invented technologies like Slack to allow workforces to do that. So there's definitely some reasonably priced tools to do that. Nick, I'm going to throw that over to you now.
I guess that's been the theme, right? Communications, you just naturally lose it. What do you do to ensure it stays a key part of your team, of your company? Something that I've had some success with, and is, a typical meeting in the typical workplace when things are, quote unquote normal. That's the managers, that's the owners, calling the meetings and setting the agenda. I think a great practice in ensuring good communication is to just empower everybody to communicate, right? So let the team call a meeting and set the agenda. That's something that I think people really appreciate in this crazy kind of upside down time. Communication is not any one thing, right? It's being really uncomfortably transparent. It's listening, and it's allowing the whole team to contribute to this problem of this crazy remote environment, right? So I think and be intentional about it. Sit down, sketch it out. How are you going to communicate to your team? I'm going to do this, this, and this. I'm going to collect feedback here, and here. I'm going to open up some new opportunities for communication. And I think when you try it from I know one local executive director of a nonprofit that has an open Zoom hours. Every Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, people can jump in, talk with her, see what's kind of, going on. So try it from a multifaceted approach. Don't get locked into the staff meeting on Monday morning. And I think you'll be okay. Just follow it. Just those natural, communication habits that we already have, and I think you'll be all right.
Excellent. Well, we've run out of time, but we could have gone on, I'm sure, for a lot longer on this topic. But I want to say, wow, we really got a lot of great insights here for a lot of business owners to think about in context to managing a remote workforce. I want to thank Dr. Roche, Karen, and Nick for taking times out of their busy day to join us and to provide our attendees now and in the future with a glimpse at some ideas and things for them to think about in considering managing a remote workforce.
I didn't have a busy day. I am on summer vacation. So.
Yeah. Yes, except for those who are teaching. Correct. Yeah. Nick is working all the time. I know. I get it. We want to thank all of you who took the time out of your busy days to join us on this webinar. And I want to let you know that we're going to be passing on, if you registered for the webinar, you'll be getting a link to this, so you'll be able to get to see it again. And we'll also be posting this on our Hudson Valley Credit Union YouTube channel. So it'll be available to anybody who wants to have it. If you'd like, somebody that missed it, please let them know that it exists. Pass the link on to them. If you have a fellow business owner, we would be happy to obviously have them learn from this great group today. I also want to remind you that we have another business webinar coming up, and registration is now open for the strategies for business networking in the post-COVID era. So you want to talk about another great topic to deal with. How do we network going forward in this crazy environment? We're going to have another panel of experts to help shed some light on that. That will be happening on Tuesday, June 15th at 2 p.m. And you can go to the Hudson Valley website, hvcu.org, and you'll be able to find the information and register. These webinars are open to our business community for free. And that's because Hudson Valley has a deep commitment to making sure that our business community is well supported in every way that we can as a financial organization. We have over 7,000 business members, and we're proud of each and every one of them working hard to help build our economy here in the Hudson Valley. So this is our way of making sure we do what we can to give back. Again, thank you, panelists. You were great today. Love to have you back again for another topic at some point in time. This is Dave Dirks saying thank you all for joining us. We'll have you back again.
Thank you.